The crack of splintering wood echoed across the Montana plains as Zara Redfield fought desperately to control the wagon careening down the dusty street of Bozeman. Her father's lifeless body having tumbled from the seat just moments before when his heart simply stopped beating. She had been traveling alongside him from St. Louis to their new homestead, a journey that had taken 3 grueling months across the frontier. And now, with barely 2 miles left to their destination, everything had gone catastrophically wrong. The horses, spooked by a rattlesnake coiled near the road, had bolted into a full gallop, and when her father reached for the reins, clutching his chest instead, Zara watched in horror as the man who had raised her alone after her mother's death from scarlet fever tumbled backward onto the hard ground. The reins had slipped from the bench, dangling uselessly between the 2 panicked horses, and Zara had tried to climb forward to reach them. But the violent jolting of the wagon over the rutted road made it impossible to maintain her balance. She screamed for help, her voice raw with terror and grief, knowing that at this speed the wagon would overturn the moment it hit one of the larger ruts or boulders scattered across the landscape. Lucas Jensen had been riding back from checking his cattle herd when he heard the scream, his head snapping toward the main road, where he saw the runaway wagon barreling toward a sharp curve that would certainly send it tumbling down a steep embankment. Without hesitation, he spurred his chestnut stallion into a gallop, his lean body pressed low against the horse's neck as he urged every ounce of speed from the animal. The distance closed rapidly, and Lucas could see a young woman with auburn hair whipping wildly around her terrified face, her hands gripping the wagon seat so tightly her knuckles had turned white. He had maybe 30 seconds before the wagon reached that curve, and he pushed his horse harder, pulling alongside the frenzied team. "Hold on tight," he shouted over the thundering hooves and rattling wheels, but he doubted she could hear him above the chaos. Lucas leaned dangerously from his saddle, reaching for the harness of the nearest horse while maintaining his grip on his own reins with his other hand. His fingers brushed the leather once, twice, and then finally caught hold. The momentum nearly pulled him from his saddle, his shoulders screaming in protest as he bore the full weight of trying to slow 2 terrified horses while keeping himself mounted. "Whoa, steady now," he called to the horses, his voice firm but calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Years of working with livestock had taught him that panic only bred more panic, and he forced himself to breathe steadily even as his muscles burned with effort. The curve loomed ahead, now just 15 seconds away. Lucas tightened his grip and pulled harder, feeling his stallion struggle beneath him as it tried to slow its own pace while he attempted to control the other team. The wagon lurched violently, and he heard the woman cry out, but he could not look back, could not afford even a second of distraction. 10 seconds. The horses began to respond to the pressure, their gallop slowing incrementally to a canter. Lucas spoke continuously now, a steady stream of soothing words that seemed to cut through their terror. His own horse, well-trained and responsive, began to slow as well, adding its weight to the effort. 5 seconds. The wagon wheels kicked up a spray of rocks as they skidded slightly, and Lucas felt the harness slipping in his sweat-slicked palm. He clenched his fist tighter, ignoring the burn of leather cutting into his skin, and gave one final, massive pull. The horses slowed to a trot just as they reached the curve, and Lucas guided them in a wide arc away from the embankment, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Gradually, steadily, he brought the entire outfit to a trembling halt in the middle of the road, dust swirling around them in the late afternoon sun. For a moment, there was only the sound of heavy breathing, both equine and human, and the creak of the wagon settling. Lucas released the harness and straightened in his saddle, his shoulder protesting the movement, and turned to check on the woman. Zara sat frozen on the bench, her face pale beneath a coating of dust, her green eyes wide with shock. Her entire body trembled, and she seemed unable to move or speak, staring at him as though he were an apparition. "You are safe now," Lucas said gently, dismounting from his horse with practiced ease despite his exhaustion. "It is over." His words seemed to break whatever spell held her, and suddenly she was moving, climbing down from the wagon with shaking legs that nearly gave out beneath her. Lucas stepped forward instinctively, catching her elbow to steady her, and felt the tremors running through her entire frame. "My father," she gasped, her voice breaking. "He fell, back there on the road. His heart, I think. He just grabbed his chest and then he was gone. I need to go back. I need to find him." Lucas felt his chest tighten at the raw anguish in her voice, the way her eyes glistened with unshed tears that she was clearly fighting to contain. He wanted to offer her hope, but he had seen enough death on the frontier to recognize the likely truth in her words. "I will take you to him," he said quietly. "But first, let me secure these horses. They are still spooked, and we cannot risk them bolting again." She nodded mutely, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the June afternoon. Lucas worked quickly, tying the team to a sturdy tree and checking them for injuries. They had emerged remarkably unscathed, though their eyes still showed white with residual fear. His own horse stood calm and steady, trained to ground tie without need of tethering. "Can you ride?" Lucas asked, returning to her side. When she nodded, he helped her onto his stallion before swinging up behind her. She stiffened at the proximity, but he kept his touch respectful, one arm loosely around her waist to steady her while he held the reins with his other hand. They found her father about a quarter-mile back, lying still in the road where he had fallen. Lucas felt the woman in front of him go rigid as they approached, and he brought the horse to a gentle stop, several feet away. "Wait here," he said softly, but she was already sliding down, stumbling toward the motionless figure. "Papa," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands hovered over his body as though afraid to touch him to make his death real. "Papa, please." Lucas dismounted and approached slowly, giving her space while he confirmed what he already knew. The man's eyes stared unseeing at the vast Montana sky, his face frozen in an expression of surprise. He had likely died before he even hit the ground, his heart giving out swiftly and completely. "I am very sorry," Lucas said, crouching beside her. "He is gone." A sound emerged from her throat, something between a sob and a keen, and then she was weeping, her whole body shaking with the force of her grief. Lucas remained silent, present but not intrusive, letting her have this moment with her father. The sun had begun its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and he knew they needed to move soon, but this could not be rushed. After several minutes, she drew a shuddering breath and wiped her face with trembling hands. "We were so close," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Just 2 more miles to our land. He was so happy this morning, talking about the house he would build, the crops we would plant. He never even got to see it." "What is your name?" Lucas asked gently. "Zara Redfield," she said, looking at him properly for the first time. Her eyes were red-rimmed but intelligent, taking in his weather-worn face, the lines around his blue eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun, the brown hair that needed cutting beneath his dusty hat. "Who are you?" "Lucas Jensen. My ranch is about 5 miles west of here. I know this is difficult, but we need to get your father to town before dark. The undertaker there is a good man. He will take care of everything properly." Zara looked back at her father's body, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I have no money for a burial." Everything we had went into buying the land and supplies for the journey. I do not even know how I will pay you for your help." "I am not asking for payment," Lucas said firmly, "and we will figure out the rest. But right now we need to move. Can you help me get him into the wagon?" She nodded, standing on unsteady legs. Together they lifted her father's body, and Lucas was struck by how light the man was, how the frontier had clearly whittled him down to bone and sinew. They laid him gently in the back of the wagon, and Zara covered him with a blanket from their supplies, her movements tender and careful. Lucas retrieved his horse and tied it to the back of the wagon before climbing onto the bench. "Sit beside me," he told Zara. "I will drive the team." She obeyed without argument, settling onto the seat with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. As Lucas guided the now calm horses back toward Bozeman, she sat in silence, staring at her hands folded in her lap. The town of Bozeman had grown considerably since the railroad had arrived in 1883. And though it was now 1885, the changes still amazed Lucas every time he came into town. What had once been a small frontier settlement now boasted several hundred residents, proper wooden buildings lining Main Street, and all the trappings of civilization, including a church, a school, and a newspaper office. He drove directly to the undertaker's establishment, a modest building at the edge of town run by a somber man named Edward Finch, who had moved west from Pennsylvania 5 years prior. Edward emerged as they pulled up, his practiced eye immediately assessing the situation. "Lucas," he acknowledged with a nod before turning his attention to Zara. "My condolences, miss. If you will permit me, I will take care of your loved one with the utmost respect." "I cannot pay you right now," Zara said, her voice small, "but I will find a way, I promise." Edward waved a hand dismissively. "We will work something out. Right now, let us get your father inside and you can tell me how you would like to proceed." Lucas helped carry the body inside while Zara followed, her steps mechanical. The undertaker's parlor smelled of wood polish and the herbs Edward used in his preparations, and though the space was somber, it was clean and dignified. "I will need some information," Edward said gently, producing a ledger. "His full name, age, where he was born if you know it." "Samuel Redfield," Zara recited, her voice distant. "He was 52 years old. Born in Virginia, but we lived in St. Louis before coming here. He was a carpenter by trade. A good man. The best man." Her voice broke on the last words and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Edward gave her a moment before continuing with his questions, and Lucas stood nearby, uncertain whether to leave or stay, but unwilling to abandon her entirely. When the immediate arrangements were settled, Edward said, "The burial can be tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. The church graveyard has space, and Reverend Thomas will perform the service." "Thank you," Zara whispered. Outside, darkness had fully settled over the town, and the temperature had dropped as it always did in the mountains. Zara stood on the wooden sidewalk, looking lost, and Lucas realized she likely had nowhere to go. "There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson," he said. "It is respectable and clean. I will take you there." "I told you, I have no money," Zara said, and there was an edge of desperation in her voice now. "Everything was in my father's pockets, and it amounts to maybe $3. That has to cover his burial." Lucas studied her in the lamplight spilling from the undertaker's window. She held herself with dignity despite her circumstances, her chin lifted even as tears continued to track silently down her dusty cheeks. Something in her bearing reminded him of a wild horse he had once gentled, terrified and hurting but refusing to break. "Mrs. Patterson owes me a favor," he said, which was not exactly true, but he would pay for the room himself if necessary. "Come on, you need food and rest. She followed him to the boarding house, too exhausted to argue further. Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 60s who had been running the establishment for a decade, took one look at Zara's tear-stained face and immediately bustled into action. "You poor dear," she said, ushering Zara inside. "Lucas, what has happened?" he explained briefly while Mrs. Patterson guided Zara to a chair in the parlor and pressed a cup of hot tea into her hands. Other boarders, including a surveyor and a schoolteacher, looked on with sympathy, but had the grace to keep their questions to themselves. "She needs a room," Lucas said quietly to Mrs. Patterson. "And a hot meal. I will settle the account." Mrs. Patterson nodded, her sharp eyes noting more than Lucas would have liked. She had known him since he had arrived in Montana Territory 7 years ago, a young man of 20 running from memories and mistakes in Wyoming, and she had always treated him with a mixture of maternal concern and respect. "The room at the top of the stairs is available," she said. "And I have stew still warm on the stove. You look like you could use some yourself, Lucas." He had not realized how hungry he was until she mentioned food, his stomach growling in response. That would be appreciated. Over bowls of hearty beef stew and thick slices of bread, Lucas learned more of Zara's story. She was 21 years old, unmarried despite being past the age when most women had settled down. Her mother had died when she was 15, and she had kept house for her father while he worked as a carpenter in St. Louis. "He always dreamed of having land of his own," she said, slowly eating the stew though she clearly had little appetite. "Saved for years. When he finally had enough to buy 160 acres here under the Homestead Act, he was so happy. Said we would build a good life in Montana, away from the crowded city." "Where is the land?" Lucas asked. "About 2 miles north of town, near Bridger Creek. We passed it on our way in." "He pointed it out to me this morning." Her voice caught. "He showed me where he planned to build the house, near a stand of cottonwoods. Said the sound of the leaves would be peaceful." Lucas knew the area she described, good land with water access and fertile soil. It would be a shame for it to go unclaimed, but he doubted Zara could manage a homestead alone. The government required improvements and continuous residence for 5 years before the land could be formally claimed, and a single woman would face enormous challenges meeting those requirements. "What will you do now?" he asked, though he suspected she had no answer. She set down her spoon and looked at him directly, and he saw steel beneath the grief in her eyes. "I will bury my father tomorrow, and then I will claim our land and prove up on it, just as he intended." "That is a hard life for a woman alone," Lucas said carefully. "I am aware," Zara replied, "but what other choice do I have? Return to St. Louis with nothing? My father sold everything we owned to make this journey. I have no family there, no home to return to. This land is all I have left of him, and I will not let his dream die with him." Lucas admired her determination, even as he doubted her chances of success. The frontier consumed the unprepared, and even strong men struggled to survive their first Montana winter. But he recognized the futility of argument when he saw it, so he simply nodded. "If you need help getting started, I will do what I can," he offered. "Why?" Zara asked bluntly. "You do not know me. You already saved my life today and paid for my room. Why would you help further?" It was a fair question, and Lucas took a moment to consider his answer. "Because your father deserved to see his dream realized, and because no one should face the frontier completely alone." Something in her expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Your kindness means more than you know." After ensuring Zara was settled in her room, Lucas retrieved his horse and began the ride back to his ranch. The night was clear and cold. Stars scattered across the sky in brilliant profusion, and he had plenty of time to think about the unexpected turn his day had taken. He had been alone for a long time by choice, having sworn off romantic entanglements after the disaster in Wyoming. His engagement to Margaret Williams had ended when he discovered her in the arms of his supposed best friend, and the betrayal had cut deep enough that he had fled north to Montana Territory, determined to build a new life free from the complications of love. In the 7 years since, he had focused entirely on his ranch, building it from a modest claim into a thriving cattle operation with over 300 head, and hired men to help with the work. At 27, he was successful by frontier standards, respected in the community, and utterly alone except for his foreman and the seasonal ranch hands. He had convinced himself that solitude was preferable to risking his heart again, that the company of cattle and horses was sufficient. But something about the grief-stricken woman with auburn hair and green eyes had cracked the walls he had built around himself, and he found himself unable to simply walk away from her plight. The next afternoon, Lucas rode back into Bozeman for Samuel Redfield's burial. A surprising number of townspeople had gathered at the small cemetery beside the church, drawn by the tragedy of a man dying within sight of his dream. Reverend Thomas, a kind-faced man in his 50s, delivered a thoughtful eulogy despite never having met the deceased, speaking of hope and perseverance, and the courage required to seek a new life in an untamed land. Zara stood beside the simple pine coffin that Edward Finch had provided at cost, her face composed but pale. She had managed to clean and mend her traveling dress, and someone, probably Mrs. Patterson, had lent her a black shawl for mourning. She did not cry during the service, but Lucas saw how her hands trembled when she placed a handful of Montana soil on the coffin as it was lowered into the ground. After the burial, several of the townswomen approached Zara with offers of support and casseroles, the universal language of frontier sympathy. Lucas hung back, uncertain of his place, until she caught his eye and made her way through the small crowd toward him. "Will you take me to the land?" she asked without preamble. "I need to see it properly to understand what I am facing." "Of course," he agreed. "I have my wagon today. We can load whatever supplies you have and bring them out." The ride to her father's claim took less than 30 minutes, and Lucas used the time to observe the land with a critical eye. The previous owner had cleared a small area and built a rudimentary lean-to before abandoning the claim, which would at least provide Zara with basic shelter. Bridger Creek ran clear and cold along the eastern boundary, ensuring good water access, and the soil looked promising for crops. But the work required to make this land livable was staggering. The lean-to would need to be converted into a proper cabin before winter, fencing would need to be erected, a well dug, fields plowed and planted. Even with help, it would be a monumental undertaking. For a woman alone, it seemed nearly impossible. Zara climbed down from the wagon and stood looking at the land, her expression unreadable. She walked slowly to the stand of cottonwoods her father had pointed out, placing her hand on the rough bark of the largest tree. "He was right," she said softly. "The leaves do sound peaceful." Lucas began unloading her supplies from the wagon, noting with concern how meager they were. Some cooking equipment, bedding, a few tools, a sack of flour and another of beans, some dried meat. Enough to survive for perhaps a few weeks if she was very careful. "The lean-to needs work," he said, examining the structure. "The roof will not hold against a serious rain, and there are gaps in the walls that will let in the cold. Do you know anything about construction?" "My father was a carpenter," Zara said, joining him. "I assisted him on many jobs. I understand the principles, but I lack the strength for the heavy labor." Lucas made a decision that he suspected he would either celebrate or regret. "I will help you build a proper cabin. My foreman can manage the ranch for a few weeks while I work here. We will need to purchase lumber from the mill in town, but the basic structure can be completed before the summer ends if we work steadily." Zara stared at him. "Why would you do this? I cannot pay you." "Consider it a loan against future prosperity," Lucas said, though they both knew the likelihood of her being able to repay him was slim. "Every homesteader needs help getting started. It is the way of the frontier." "Mr. Jensen," she began, then stopped, struggling for words. "Lucas, I do not know what to say. This is far beyond simple kindness." "Then say yes, and let us get started," he replied. "We are losing daylight." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Lucas would arrive at first light, and he and Zara would work until dark on improving the homestead. They started with the cabin, laying a proper foundation of stones from the creek and raising walls of timber purchased from the mill. Lucas handled the heavy lifting while Zara measured, fitted, and used her carpentry skills to ensure everything was square and solid. At first they worked in relative silence, both uncertain how to navigate this strange partnership. But gradually, as sweat and effort found common ground, they began to talk. Lucas told her about Wyoming, about his failed engagement and his flight to Montana, surprised to find the story less painful in the telling than he had expected. "She was a fool," Zara said firmly when he finished. "Any woman would be fortunate to have a man as honorable as you." He felt heat rise to his face at her words. "I was young and naive. I thought love was enough, but I failed to see who she truly was beneath the surface." "That is not naivety. That is hope," Zara countered. "And hope is never foolish, even when it is disappointed." She shared her own story in pieces, painting a picture of a motherless childhood spent learning her father's trade, of long evenings reading by lamplight, of friends who had gradually married and drifted away until she found herself isolated despite living in a city of thousands. "I was not pretty enough or docile enough to attract serious suitors," she said matter-of-factly as they took a break for lunch one day. "I had opinions and skills that made men uncomfortable. My father said I simply had not met the right man yet, but I think we both knew I was destined for spinsterhood." Lucas looked at her, really looked, taking in the way the sun brought out red highlights in her hair, the scattering of freckles across her nose, the strength in her capable hands. "I think your father was right. You simply had not met the right man yet." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Lucas felt something shift between them, some acknowledgement of a possibility neither was quite ready to name. Then Zara looked away, color rising in her cheeks, and stood to return to work. As the cabin took shape, walls rising and a roof going on, Lucas found himself inventing reasons to extend his time on the homestead. The door needed special attention. The windows required careful fitting. The chimney had to be perfect, or the cabin would fill with smoke. All true, but also excuses to spend more time in Zara's company. He loved watching her work, the fierce concentration on her face as she measured twice and cut once, the satisfaction when a joint fit perfectly, the smudge of dirt she always seemed to acquire on her left cheek by midday. She had a quick mind and a quicker wit, and their conversations ranged from practical matters of homesteading to philosophy and literature. "Have you read Whitman?" she asked one evening as they sat on the completed porch, too tired to make the journey back to their respective homes before dark. Lucas had taken to staying in the now abandoned lean-to on late nights, and Zara slept in the wagon until the cabin was fully ready. "Some," Lucas admitted, "though I am more accustomed to ranch ledgers than poetry." Zara smiled, and his heart did something complicated in his chest. He writes about the frontier, about the vastness of America. Listen to this. I am large, I contain multitudes. Does that not capture something essential about this place? How it makes you feel both infinite and infinitely small. I never thought about it that way, Lucas said slowly. But yes, when I first came to Montana and saw the mountains, I felt exactly that. Like I was nothing and everything at once. They talked until the stars came out, and Lucas found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he had kept locked away for years. Zara listened with an intensity that made him feel truly heard, truly seen, in a way he had never experienced before. When he finally bedded down in the lean-to that night, he acknowledged what had been growing increasingly obvious. He was falling in love with Zara Redfield, with her strength and her sorrow, her determination and her vulnerability. The realization terrified him, threatened to send him running back to the safety of his solitary ranch, but he found he could not abandon her. Would not, even if he could. The cabin was completed in late July, a sturdy structure with a large main room, a sleeping loft, and a covered porch. Zara stood in the doorway on the day they finished, her eyes bright with tears that Lucas had learned were not always about sadness. He would have been so proud, she said softly. It is exactly what he envisioned. You built this, Lucas reminded her. Your skill and knowledge made it possible. We built it, she corrected, turning to face him. I could never have done this alone, Lucas. You gave me my father's dream. I will never forget that. The gratitude in her eyes made him uncomfortable, a reminder of the inequality in their relationship. He had helped her out of growing affection, but she seemed to view his assistance as a debt to be repaid, and the disparity troubled him. What will you do now? He asked, changing the subject. The cabin is done, but you will need crops planted for next year and cattle or chickens for food and income. Have you thought about how you will manage? Zara's expression grew determined. I will manage the same way I have managed everything else, with hard work and stubbornness. Mrs. Patterson said the general store needs someone to help with accounts and inventory. I can do that work a few days a week for wages, and use the rest of my time improving the homestead. It was a reasonable plan, though Lucas privately doubted it would generate sufficient income for everything she needed. But he had learned that Zara's pride was as strong as her determination, and he could not keep offering charity without risking her rejection of his help entirely. August brought scorching heat to the Montana plains, and Lucas returned to his ranch to handle neglected business. His foreman, a grizzled veteran named Tom Cooper, gave him a knowing look when he rode in. Wondered when you would remember you own this place, Tom said, tobacco juice staining his white beard. Everything is fine here. Cattle are healthy, no losses to predators or disease. We are ready for the fall drive to the railhead. I apologize for being absent, Lucas said, dismounting. There was a situation that required my attention. Heard about that situation, Tom said, his eyes twinkling. Young woman, new homesteader, mighty pretty according to the boys who have seen her in town. You planning to keep helping her, or are you back for good now? Lucas felt his jaw tighten. I plan to continue assisting Miss Redfield with her homestead as needed. She is a neighbor, and neighbors help each other. Sure they do, Tom agreed, his tone suggesting he believed nothing of the sort. Well, while you have been helping your neighbor, I have been thinking we should expand the herd. With the railroad making transportation easier, we could double our operation in the next few years. But that would require more land, maybe purchasing the adjacent claim that Johnson is selling. They spent the evening discussing ranch business, and Lucas realized how much he had neglected in the past weeks. Yet even as he reviewed accounts and made plans, his mind kept drifting to a cabin near Bridger Creek, and the woman who now lived there alone. The next Sunday, Lucas rode into town for church, something he did sporadically at best. He told himself it was about community, about maintaining his reputation, but he knew he was really hoping to see Zara. She had mentioned that Mrs. Patterson attended services regularly and had invited her to join. Sure enough, Zara sat in a pew near the front beside the boarding house owner, wearing a simple blue dress that Lucas had not seen before. Her hair was neatly braided and pinned, and she listened attentively to Reverend Thomas's sermon about perseverance in the face of hardship. After the service, Lucas made his way through the congregation to her side. "Miss Redfield," he greeted formally, aware of the many eyes tracking their interaction. "Mr. Jensen," she replied with equal formality, but her eyes warmed when they met his. "How nice to see you. I trust your ranch business is going well enough, and your work at the general store." "It is tedious but necessary," she said. "Mr. Henderson is fair and the wages help. I have been able to purchase some chickens and supplies for a garden next spring." They made small talk, constrained by propriety and audience, and Lucas chafed at the need for such careful distance. He wanted to ask when he could visit her homestead again, wanted to tell her that he had missed their evening conversations more than seemed reasonable for such a brief acquaintance. Mrs. Patterson, watching their stilted exchange with obvious amusement, took pity on them. "Zara has been working herself to exhaustion," she announced. "Perhaps, Mr. Jensen, you could convince her to take a day of rest. A picnic by the creek, perhaps. The weather is lovely, and all work and no leisure makes for a very dull life." Zara shot the older woman a look that was half gratitude and half mortification, but Lucas seized the opportunity. "That is an excellent suggestion. Miss Redfield, would you do me the honor of joining me for a picnic this afternoon? I promise to return you to town by evening." "I suppose a few hours would not hurt," Zara said, trying for casual but failing to hide her pleasure at the invitation. They rode out to her homestead together, Lucas having prepared a basket with fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and apple pie begged from Mrs. Patterson's kitchen. They spread a blanket beneath the cottonwoods, and for the first time since they met, they had time together with no work demanding their attention. "Tell me about your ranch," Zara said, leaning back on her hands and tilting her face to the sun. "You have spoken of it, but I have never seen it." "What is it like?" Lucas described his land, the house he had built with his own hands, smaller than some but solid and comfortable, the barn that housed his horses, the seemingly endless grassland where his cattle grazed. He spoke of the satisfaction of building something from nothing, of the pride he felt watching his herd grow year by year. "It sounds wonderful," Zara said wistfully. "Lonely, perhaps, but wonderful. Do you never wish for more? For companionship, for family?" The question cut closer than she probably intended. "I did once," Lucas admitted, "but I learned that wanting something and being able to keep it are different things. It seemed safer to want only what I could control." "That is a sad way to live," Zara said gently. "My father used to say that safety is an illusion. The only real choice is whether to live fully or to merely survive." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," she agreed, and for a moment her eyes glistened with tears. "I miss him terribly. There are times when I forget he is gone, when I turn to tell him something or ask his advice, and then I remember. It hits me all over again." Lucas reached out and took her hand, a gesture of comfort that felt both natural and momentous. "The pain will ease with time, though I suspect it never fully disappears. But he would be proud of you, Zara, of your courage and your determination." She turned her hand in his, threading their fingers together. "I could not have done any of this without you. You know that, do not you?" "I would have failed within a week if you had not helped me." "I think you underestimate yourself," Lucas said. You would have found a way, but I am glad I was able to help. These past weeks, working alongside you, have been the happiest I have known in a very long time." Their eyes met and held, and Lucas felt the air between them change, charged with possibility and want. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward. Zara met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was gentle and sweet and utterly right. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring into the connection, and when they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Zara's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, and Lucas thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "I know," Zara said, a smile playing at her lips. "I could tell. You are not subtle, Lucas Jensen," he laughed, surprised and delighted by her teasing. "Neither are you, Zara Redfield. You have been tormenting me with those smiles and thoughtful conversations, making me fall for you a little more each day." "Fall for me," she repeated, her voice soft with wonder. "Truly, truly," he confirmed. "I know it is fast. I know we have known each other barely 2 months. But I cannot deny what I feel. You have become essential to me, Zara, like air or water or sunlight." She cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle. "I feel the same. I told myself it was gratitude, that I was confusing appreciation for something deeper. But it is not gratitude, Lucas. It is love. I love you." The words unlocked something in Lucas's chest, some tight knot of fear and protection that had lived there for 7 years. He kissed her again, pouring everything he felt into the contact, and Zara responded with equal passion. When they finally drew apart, the sun had moved significantly across the sky, and the picnic food sat forgotten on the blanket. They lay side by side, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and sharing dreams. "Marry me," Lucas said suddenly, the words escaping before he could second-guess them. "I know it is soon, and I know you value your independence, your father's land. But marry me, Zara. Let me spend my life making you happy." Zara was quiet for a long moment, and Lucas felt panic rising. He had moved too fast, had presumed too much, had ruined everything with his impatience. Then she said, "Yes, yes," he repeated, hardly daring to believe. "Yes, I will marry you," Zara confirmed, turning to face him fully. "But I have conditions. I will not abandon my father's homestead. This land means everything to me, and I need to prove up on it to honor his dream." "Of course," Lucas agreed immediately. "We can live here or at my ranch or split our time between both, whatever you need." "And I will not be a passive wife," Zara continued. "I want to be a partner in all things, to work beside you and have my opinions valued." "I would expect nothing less," Lucas assured her. "Your strength is one of the things I love most about you." Zara's expression softened. "Then yes, Lucas Jensen, I will marry you. I will be your wife and your partner, and we will build a life together in this wild, beautiful place." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and Lucas felt happiness flood through him, brighter and more powerful than anything he had known. He had come to Montana running from love, convinced it would only bring pain, and instead he had found a woman who challenged him and completed him in equal measure. The wedding took place in early September, a simple ceremony at the church in Bozeman, with most of the town in attendance. Zara wore a dress she had sewn herself from pale green fabric that brought out her eyes, and Lucas wore his best suit, the one he had brought from Wyoming and never thought he would need again. Mrs. Patterson cried throughout the ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Tom Cooper stood as Lucas's witness, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes, but genuinely pleased for his employer. Several of the townswomen stood with Zara, having adopted her as one of their own. Reverend Thomas spoke about love and commitment, about two becoming one while remaining themselves, and Lucas felt the truth of the words resonate in his bones. When he slipped a simple gold band onto Zara's finger, his hands were steady, his voice firm. "I, Lucas Jensen, take you, Zara Redfield, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever joys and sorrows life brings. From this day forward, you are my home and my heart." Zara's vows were equally heartfelt, her voice clear despite the tears streaming down her face. "I, Zara Redfield, take you, Lucas Jensen, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, challenge you, and build a life with you worthy of our dreams. From this day forward, you are my partner and my joy." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed his bride to enthusiastic applause, and for a moment, the world contained only the two of them, wrapped in a happiness too large for words. The reception was held at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, a feast contributed by the entire community. There was roasted beef and fresh bread, vegetables from the late summer gardens, pies and cakes in abundance. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon the parlor had been cleared for dancing. Lucas was not a graceful dancer, but he held Zara close and swayed to the music, content simply to have her in his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he felt her smile against his neck. "Happy, Mrs. Jensen," he murmured into her hair. "Indescribably," she replied. "Though I still cannot quite believe this is real. 2 months ago, my father had just died and I had nothing. Now I have a home, a husband, and a future. It seems like a dream." "If it is a dream, then we are dreaming it together," Lucas said, "and I never want to wake." They spent their wedding night at Zara's homestead, the cabin they had built together now transformed into their first home. Lucas carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they stood together in the main room, suddenly shy with each other despite their earlier passion. "I have never," Zara began, then stopped, color flooding her face. "That is, I do not know exactly." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "We have all the time in the world to figure things out together. There is no rush, no expectation. Tonight and every night we learn together." She kissed him, grateful and loving, and they did indeed learn together, discovering the language of touch and pleasure, of giving and receiving, of two souls becoming one flesh. It was awkward and sweet and perfect, and when they finally fell asleep in the loft, tangled together beneath the quilts Zara had brought from St. Louis, Lucas felt a peace he had never known before. The first year of their marriage brought both challenges and joys. They decided to maintain both properties, spending summers at Zara's homestead where they planted extensive gardens and began building a small herd of cattle and chickens, and winters at Lucas's ranch where the larger house provided better shelter against the Montana cold. Zara proved to be as capable a rancher as she was a carpenter, her quick mind grasping the intricacies of cattle management, and her fearlessness making her adept at handling even the most stubborn livestock. She rode beside Lucas during roundups, worked the branding fires, and kept meticulous records that improved their efficiency significantly. Tom Cooper, initially skeptical about having a woman involved in ranch operations, became one of Zara's staunchest supporters. "She has got a better head for this than half the men I have worked with," he told Lucas one evening. "You found yourself a keeper, boss." "I know," Lucas agreed, watching Zara across the yard as she examined a new calf with practiced efficiency. "Believe me, I know." Their partnership extended beyond the ranch. Zara continued her work at the general store during the winter months, and Lucas found himself drawn into community affairs he had previously avoided. Together, they helped organize a schoolhouse building project, contributed to a fund for families struggling through hard times, and became pillars of the growing Bozeman community. In the spring of their second year together, Zara missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when a second month passed and she began feeling queasy in the mornings, she could no longer deny the possibility. "Lucas," she said one evening as they sat on the porch of the homestead cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains, "I think I might be carrying a child." He turned to her, his eyes wide. "Truly, you are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation," she said. "But all the signs are there. I am about 2 months along, I think." Lucas pulled her into his arms, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "A baby, our baby. Zara, this is extraordinary. You are happy then?" she asked, though she could see the answer written plainly on his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "Terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. You are going to be a wonderful mother." "And you will be an amazing father," she replied. "Though I confess I am terrified too. What if something goes wrong? What if I do not know what to do?" "Then we will figure it out together, just as we have figured out everything else," Lucas said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know, Zara. You will be magnificent." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer, Zara's belly swelling with their growing child. Lucas became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any work he deemed too strenuous, much to her amused exasperation. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she told him after he tried to stop her from lifting a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies while running farms since the beginning of time. I promise to be careful, but you must let me live my life." He relented, though his vigilance never truly waned. He read every book on pregnancy and childbirth he could acquire, pestered the doctor in town with questions, and spent hours building a beautiful wooden cradle for their child. In late January 1887, on a bitterly cold night with snow falling thick outside, Zara went into labor. Lucas rode like a madman to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Patterson, who had assisted with countless births, and then paced the main room of the ranch house while Zara labored in their bedroom. The sounds of her pain tore at him, making him feel helpless in a way he had not experienced since the day he watched her father's wagon career out of control. He wanted to fix this, to make it easier for her, but all he could do was wait and pray. After 8 hours that felt like 8 days, a baby's cry split the air, and Mrs. Patterson emerged from the bedroom with a broad smile. "You have a son, Lucas. A big, healthy boy with a fine set of lungs." Lucas rushed into the room to find Zara propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a squalling bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he entered, and the smile that spread across her face made his knees weak. "Meet your son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket so he could see the red, wrinkled face of his child. "What do you think?" Lucas sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out a tentative finger to stroke the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "He is perfect. You are perfect." "I do not have words for what I am feeling right now." "Then just feel it," Zara said. "We have a son, Lucas, a family." They named him Samuel after Zara's father and Lucas James for a middle name. Little Sam, as they called him, proved to be a robust baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He transformed their lives completely, filling the ranch house with noise and chaos and indescribable joy. Lucas discovered reserves of tenderness he had not known he possessed, happily walking the floor with a colicky baby at 3 in the morning, changing soiled diapers without complaint, and singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed his son when nothing else would. Zara marveled at the sight of her strong, capable husband reduced to putty by their infant son. "You are going to spoil him terribly," she teased one afternoon, watching Lucas coo at the baby during a diaper change. "That is my right as his father," Lucas replied with mock seriousness. "Mothers are for discipline, fathers are for spoiling." "I do not think that is how it works," Zara laughed. "Well, that is how it works in this family," Lucas insisted, lifting Sam and blowing a raspberry on his belly that sent the baby into fits of giggles. As Sam grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered beyond Lucas's most optimistic projections. The expanded herd thrived, selling at premium prices thanks to the quality breeding program Zara had helped implement. They purchased additional land, including the claim Tom Cooper had suggested years before, and hired more men to help with the increased workload. Zara's homestead was officially proven up in 1888, the government recognizing her ownership of the 160 acres her father had claimed. They had kept their promise to maintain the property, spending summers there as a family, and Lucas added a second room to the cabin to accommodate their growing son. On the anniversary of Samuel Redfield's death, they always visited his grave, bringing fresh flowers and telling Sam stories about the grandfather he would never meet. "He would have loved you so much," Zara told her son, running her fingers over the headstone. "He always wanted grandchildren. It breaks my heart that he never got to meet you." "He knows," Lucas said quietly, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Somehow, I believe he knows. And he knows that his dream lived on, that the land he claimed became something beautiful." 3 years after Sam's birth, Zara found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder, her body struggling with the demands of chasing an energetic toddler while carrying a new child. She was sick for months, unable to keep much food down, and Lucas worried constantly. "Maybe we should not have any more after this," he said one night, holding her hair back as she retched into a basin. "I cannot stand seeing you suffer like this." "It will pass," Zara said weakly. "And we both want a large family. This is simply the price of that dream." "Not if it costs your health," Lucas insisted. "You are more important than any dream." But Zara was right. The sickness passed in the 4th month, and the rest of the pregnancy proceeded smoothly. In September 1890, she delivered a daughter they named Margaret Rose, called Maggie from the start. She was smaller than Sam had been, delicate where he was sturdy, but healthy and perfect. Sam, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help with her care. Lucas and Zara watched their children together with hearts overflowing, scarcely able to believe the life they had built. "You ever think about that day?" Zara asked one evening as they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching Sam play in the yard while baby Maggie slept in her cradle. "The day you saved me from the runaway wagon." "Sometimes," Lucas admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at once." "Why?" "I was just thinking about how much has changed," Zara said. "If my father's heart had not failed that day, if you had not been riding that particular road at that particular moment, none of this would exist. Sam would not exist. Maggie would not exist. This whole beautiful life would have never been." "But it did happen," Lucas said, reaching for her hand. "And I am grateful every day for the chance encounter that brought you into my life. You saved me, Zara, just as surely as I saved you that day. I was so lost before you, so convinced that love was weakness and solitude was strength. You showed me I was wrong." "We saved each other," Zara corrected softly. "You gave me a reason to keep living when I had lost everything. You gave me hope and purpose, and a love I never dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the Montana sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Sam ran over, demanding his father come see something fascinating, and Lucas allowed himself to be dragged away with exaggerated protests that made his son giggle. Zara watched them go, her heart full to bursting, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The grief and terror of that day on the road had transformed into this extraordinary life, and though she still missed her father with an ache that never fully disappeared, she knew he would be proud of what she had built. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Lucas and Zara added 2 more children to their family, twin boys named Daniel and David, born in 1893. The ranch expanded further, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region, and Zara's keen business sense proved instrumental in their prosperity. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations and personal setbacks, always standing together against whatever challenges arose. Their love, which had begun in crisis and grown through partnership, deepened with each passing year into something solid and unshakable. Sam grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch life and showed every sign of being a capable successor to his father. Maggie inherited her mother's quick mind and stubbornness, announcing at 12 that she intended to attend college, an ambition her parents supported despite its unconventional nature. The twins were wild and inseparable, bringing chaos and laughter wherever they went. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1900, Lucas and Zara stood once again beneath the cottonwoods at her father's homestead, now surrounded by thriving fields and a well-maintained cabin that they still used as a summer retreat. 15 years, Zara marveled, leaning into her husband's embrace. It has gone so fast. The best years of my life, Lucas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. And I look forward to 15 more and 15 after that, and as many as we are granted. We have been fortunate, Zara agreed. So incredibly fortunate. Sometimes I wake up and cannot believe this is my life, that I get to share it with you. I know exactly what you mean, Lucas said. I was dead inside before you came along, Zara. Oh, I was walking and talking and working, but I was not truly alive. You rescued me from that half-life, gave me a reason to open my heart again. And you rescued me from despair and loneliness, Zara replied. From a future with no hope and no love. We rescued each other, Lucas, and built something neither of us could have created alone. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the sun set over the land that had been the beginning of everything. And Lucas thought about the improbable chain of events that had brought them together. A dying man's dream, a spooked horse, a moment of decision to ride toward a scream instead of away from it, all conspiring to create a love that had transformed both their lives. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the cabin where their family had gathered for the anniversary celebration, and Lucas smiled against Zara's hair. This was what he had been running from all those years ago, this messy, complicated, beautiful tangle of love and commitment and family. He had been so afraid of being hurt again that he had almost missed the greatest gift of his life. "What are you thinking?" Zara asked, tilting her head to look up at him. "That I would live through every heartbreak and disappointment again if it meant ending up here with you," Lucas said honestly. "That you and our children and this life we have built are worth every moment of pain that came before." Zara reached up to cup his face, her eyes shining with tears and love. "We still have so much ahead of us. Sam will marry someday soon, I think. That girl from the Henderson ranch has caught his eye. There will be grandchildren." "More chaos," Lucas said with a laugh. "More noise and mess and sleepless nights." "More love," Zara corrected. "More of this extraordinary, ordinary life we get to share." "I cannot wait to see what the future brings." "Neither can I," Lucas agreed, "as long as we face it together." They kissed beneath the whispering cottonwoods, the same trees where Samuel Redfield had imagined building his dream house, and Lucas felt the circle of it all, the way grief and loss had transformed into hope and love. how one man's unfulfilled dream had become another's greatest blessing. As darkness fell and they walked hand in hand back to the cabin where their children waited, Lucas thought about the young man he had been 15 years ago, bitter and closed off and running from his own heart. That man would never have believed that a runaway wagon and a grieving woman would become the salvation he had not known he needed. But life had a way of surprising you, of taking your carefully constructed walls and demolishing them with the simple power of connection and love. Zara had not just become his wife. She had become his partner in every sense of the word, his equal and his complement, the person who made him want to be better and braver and more open to all the possibilities life offered. The years continued their steady march, bringing the new century and all the changes it promised. The automobile made its appearance in Bozeman, though Lucas remained stubbornly devoted to his horses. Electricity came to town, though it would be years before it reached the more remote ranches. The world was transforming, growing faster and more connected, but some things remained constant. The Jensen Ranch, built on the foundation of hard work and love, continued to thrive. Sam did indeed marry the Henderson girl, a sweet-natured young woman named Clara who fit seamlessly into the family. They gave Lucas and Zara their first grandchild in 1902, a boy they named Samuel Lucas, and the sight of Zara holding her grandson brought tears to Lucas's eyes. "Your father would have been so proud," he told her as she cooed at the baby. His great-grandson, bearing his name into the next generation. "All of this grew from his dream," Zara said softly. "The land he claimed, the life he envisioned, it all became real, just not in the way he imagined." Maggie did go to college, attending the University of Montana and studying mathematics, scandalizing some of the more conservative townspeople, but making her parents immensely proud. She returned home with a degree and a husband, a professor named Robert who treated her as an equal and supported her unconventional ambitions. The twins took over increasing responsibility for the ranch operations as Lucas and Zara aged, showing the same partnership and complementary skills that had served their parents so well. They were different in temperament but united in purpose, working together to modernize and expand while maintaining the core values Lucas had instilled. In 1910, as Lucas and Zara celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, they took a moment alone on the porch of the ranch house Lucas had built all those years ago when he was young and heartbroken and running from love. 25 years, Lucas said wonderingly. "Where did the time go?" "Into all of this," Zara said, gesturing at the family gathered in their yard at the prosperous ranch spreading out in all directions at the life they had built. "Every moment led to this, Lucas. Every joy and sorrow, every challenge and triumph, all woven together into something beautiful." Lucas looked at his wife, seeing both the young woman who had fought to control a runaway wagon and the mature woman she had become, silver threading through her auburn hair, lines of laughter and worry etched around her eyes. She was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I love you," he said, the words as true and essential as they had been the first time he spoke them beneath the cottonwoods. "I have loved you every day of our marriage, and I will love you every day I have left on this earth." "And I love you," Zara replied, taking his hand. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed. You showed me that loss can transform into love, that endings can become beginnings. You rescued me, Lucas Jensen, in every way a person can be rescued." "We rescued each other," Lucas said, pulling her close. "And we built something neither of us could have imagined alone. A family, a legacy, a love that will outlast us both." They stood together on the porch as the sun set over the Montana mountains, the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the birth of their children and grandchildren. The land that had seemed so wild and untamed when Lucas first arrived had been transformed by their labor and love into something enduring. The sounds of their family drifted through the evening air, laughter and conversation, children playing and grandchildren calling out. This was the life that had grown from a moment of crisis on a dusty road, from a choice to ride toward a scream instead of away from it, from two broken people finding wholeness in each other. Lucas thought about the long road that had brought him here, the failures and disappointments that had driven him north to Montana, the walls he had built around his heart to protect himself from further pain. He had been so certain that safety lay in solitude, that the only way to avoid being hurt was to avoid caring at all. How wrong he had been. The greatest risks he had ever taken, opening his heart to Zara, building a family, investing fully in a life of connection and love, had brought the greatest rewards. The vulnerability he had feared had become his strength. The intimacy he had avoided had become his salvation. "What are you thinking about?" Zara asked, recognizing the contemplative expression on his face. "About that scared young man who rode away from Wyoming convinced he would never love again," Lucas said. "About how much he would have missed if he had succeeded in closing himself off from the world." "But he did not succeed," Zara pointed out. "A runaway wagon and a desperate woman conspired to crack open his defenses. Fate had other plans for Lucas Jensen." "Fate," Lucas repeated thoughtfully. "I used to think I could control my life through sheer force of will, that if I just worked hard enough and avoided emotional entanglements, I could be content. But contentment is not the same as happiness, and safety is not the same as fulfillment." "No," Zara agreed. "True fulfillment requires risk. It demands that we open ourselves to the possibility of loss, because that is the only way we can truly gain. You taught me that, Lucas. After my father died, I wanted to close myself off too, to focus only on survival and duty. But you showed me that life could be more than just enduring." Their oldest grandchild, little Samuel, came running up to the porch, demanding his grandfather come play. Lucas scooped up the boy with a laugh, swinging him high as the child shrieked with delight. Zara watched them with soft eyes, seeing her husband transformed yet again by love, this time for the next generation. As the evening drew on, and the family gradually departed to their various homes, Lucas and Zara were left alone in the house that had been the center of their life together. They moved through their nighttime routine with the ease of long practice, comfortable in the silence that came from truly knowing another person. In bed, Zara curled against Lucas's side, her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. This simple intimacy, the comfort of her body against his, the sound of her breathing, the warmth of her presence, these had become as essential to him as air. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly into the darkness. "Marrying me, tying yourself to this life. You could have returned to St. Louis found a different path." "Never," Zara said firmly. "Not for a single moment, Lucas. You and this life we have built are the greatest gifts I have ever received. Why would you even ask such a thing?" "Sometimes I worry that I am not enough," Lucas admitted. "That you deserve more than a simple rancher who spent his best years afraid of his own heart." Zara shifted, propping herself up on her elbow so she could look at him in the moonlight filtering through the window. "You listen to me, Lucas Jensen. You are more than enough. You are everything. You saved my life that day on the road, yes, but more than that, you gave my life meaning again. You showed me that joy was still possible, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. How could that ever not be enough?" Lucas pulled her down for a kiss, pouring all his love and gratitude into the contact. After 25 years, kissing her still made his heart race, still filled him with wonder that this extraordinary woman had chosen him. "I am the lucky one," he murmured against her lips. "The luckiest man who ever lived." "Then we are both lucky," Zara said. "Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have built this life, lucky to have love that grows stronger with each passing year instead of fading." They settled back into their embrace, and Lucas felt peace wash over him. This was what he had been searching for without knowing it all those years ago when he fled north to Montana. Not just love, though that was part of it, but partnership. A meeting of equals, two people who made each other better, stronger, more complete. The years continued their inevitable progression, and Lucas and Zara aged together, their hair turning silver, their steps growing slower, but their love undiminished. They handed over increasing responsibility for the ranch to their sons, while maintaining their involvement in the decisions that shaped its future. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch house with noise and chaos during holidays and special occasions. Lucas built a larger dining table to accommodate the growing family, and Zara sewed quilts for each new baby, carrying on the tradition her own mother had started. They still spent summers at the original homestead when they could, though the journey became harder as their bones grew creaky with age. The cabin had been enlarged and improved over the years, but they kept the original structure intact, a testament to where their life together had truly begun. In the summer of 1920, as they sat once more beneath the cottonwoods, Lucas reflected on 35 years of marriage and a life fuller than he had ever imagined possible. He was 62 years old now, his body marked by decades of hard labor, but his heart was as full as it had been the day he married Zara. "You hear that?" Zara asked, tilting her head. Lucas listened, hearing the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant sound of cattle lowing, the creek bubbling over stones. "What am I listening for?" "Peace," Zara said simply. "The sound of a life well lived. My father would hear it too if he were here. This place, it holds all our dreams, all our love. Can you not feel it?" Lucas could feel it, the accumulated weight of decades of joy and sorrow, work and rest, all soaked into the land like rain into thirsty soil. This place was sacred not because of any religious significance, but because of what it represented, the transformation of grief into hope, of endings into beginnings. "I feel it," he said, "and I am grateful for every moment that led us here." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent, and Lucas thought about the runaway wagon that had brought them together, about split-second decisions and providential timing. If he had taken a different route that day, if he had been 5 minutes later or earlier, if he had ignored the scream and ridden on, two lives would have unfolded in completely different directions. But he had not ignored the scream. He had ridden toward it, and in saving Zara's life, he had saved his own, not from physical death, but from the slow spiritual death of isolation and fear. She had rescued him from a life without love, had shown him that opening his heart was not weakness but the greatest strength of all. As darkness fell and they made their way back to the cabin, Lucas held Zara's hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his after all these years. They had weathered every storm together, celebrated every triumph, mourned every loss. They had built an empire out of dirt and determination, raised children who were thriving and contributing members of society, created a legacy that would outlast them both. Inside the cabin, they prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, and as Lucas held his wife close in the darkness, he felt overwhelmingly blessed. He had started out seeking only to escape his pain, to build a new life free from the complications of love and connection. Instead, He had found everything he had been missing without knowing it was gone. "I love you," he whispered into Zara's hair, words he had spoken thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. "And I love you," she replied, the response as automatic as breathing but no less sincere. "Always and forever, Lucas Jensen. You are my heart." They drifted to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found wholeness in their union, who had transformed individual brokenness into shared strength. Outside, the cottonwoods whispered their eternal song, standing witness to a love that had begun in crisis and grown into something timeless. The Jensen Ranch would continue for generations, passed down through the family Lucas and Zara had created together. Their grandchildren would have children of their own, and those children would have children, each generation building on the foundation laid by a cowboy who rescued a woman from a runaway wagon, and a woman who rescued that cowboy from a life without love. Their story would be told and retold, becoming part of the family mythology, a reminder that the greatest love stories often begin in the most unexpected ways. A moment of crisis, a choice to help instead of turning away, two broken hearts finding healing in each other. These simple elements had combined to create something extraordinary. As Lucas and Zara lived out their remaining years surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they had built, they never forgot the truth that had brought them together. Love required courage. It demanded vulnerability, but the rewards for taking that risk were beyond measure. They had rescued each other, and in doing so, they had discovered that salvation comes not from running away from pain, but from opening oneself to connection, despite the risk of loss. In a wild, untamed land that demanded strength and resilience, they had found that the greatest strength of all was the willingness to love fully, deeply, and without reservation. And as the years turned to decades, as their hair whitened and their steps slowed, as they watched their children and grandchildren build lives of their own, Lucas and Zara held fast to each other and to the love that had transformed them both. It was a love born of crisis and forged in partnership, tested by time and strengthened by commitment, and it would endure long after they had returned to the Montana soil they had worked and loved. The runaway wagon that had brought them together was long gone, reduced to firewood or decay, but what it had set in motion continued. Two lives intertwined, two hearts beating as one, a love that had rescued them both from loneliness and given them everything worth having. This was their legacy, and it was enough.